Next slide.
Evelyn, please record.
Yeah. So if you can bring out all, I guess, all the things. So most recently, as part of one of the UN initiatives, I also participated in Asian Development Bank's hackathon. And these were sort of the 10 standard things that they would look for, I think, in any sort of pitch. And as you can see, basically, I'll go through what each of these are, but I think when you think about how to actually convince people to buy into your idea, this is kind of the framework. So 30 seconds. What's the problem? What's the solution? What's the market size? What's the business model? Who are your competitors? How are you going to market this? The team that's in place, how do you measure the traction you're gaining, and what are the needs? So if we move to the next slide, the 30 seconds first. What is 30 seconds? So this is the elevator pitch. A lot of people, I think when they think about how to actually pitch an idea, they always think about building up to the solution, the crescendo. But at the same time, if you think about, especially in one of these events, a hackathon, a short presentation, you actually need to capture your audience first. You need to have that the 30 seconds. You need to have the tagline, the slogan. What is it that's actually making your idea so great? You need to be able to come out right on top that will actually capture the audience. And for these types of events, KYA, know your audience. That's very, very important that you actually understand who's actually sitting, whether it's an investor, whether it's a judge, whether it's a panel. Who is your audience, and what do you actually need to give them to actually captivate them? So it could be a panel of all CTOs, in which case maybe your presentation is probably going to be more technical. Maybe it's a panel of all CEOs. Maybe it's going to be more high level, big vision. So knowing your audience is very, very important. And then in terms of being simple and captivating, because any idea that's too complex to understand sort of within 30 seconds, people might not actually listen to your full story. So that's the 30 seconds. So instead of actually waiting to build up to get your primary point across, you need to think about what is it that I can come out right off the bat and captivate people so that they will actually spend the time to listen to you. Next slide. So problem. I know sort of everyone sort of gets to this part. What is the problem you're trying to solve? I think everyone knows that. But where I kind of want to stress, usually for most pitches, this is not as big of a problem, I think. But at the same time, in an SDG context, I think this is actually very, very important, because this is the start of your discovery journey and the path that you take to actually solve whatever problem you're trying to solve. How I would coin it is identifying a problem is actually not so difficult. Identifying and pinpointing an addressable problem that can be applied to solve a potentially bigger problem. I think that's actually what people are looking for. So just highlighting an example from my logistics business that we're working on right now. Everyone probably in Hong Kong knows SF Logistics. They're one of the biggest courier companies probably in Asia. So one of our clients is looking for a delivery service to help lessen the load on their customer service teams. In which case they need B2C delivery, home delivery. So Sunfeng naturally is an option, but where we actually come in and potentially are offering more to our client is that we create a customer service client portal that their end customers can directly actually log their requests in, say change address, specific time request, etc. And what this is doing is actually lessening their customer service team loading, decreasing the CS manpower footprint in their offices, in which case they can actually use those office space for revenue generating activities. And also how this can actually be applied to potentially their redemption centers and other places of other areas within their business where potentially any sort of customer can actually go direct to their back end. And so it's not always just addressing the immediate problem, but how can that solution be applied to a bigger problem? And so from going back to an SDG perspective, usually this is a little harder just because more often than not, it's not just a commercial problem. It might not just be an efficiency problem. It might not just be an operational problem. It can actually be all of the above and then some. Actually, most recently, probably in terms of quality education, we've actually seen in Afghanistan where with the recent sort of takeover, change in government, there might be restrictions on gender education, there might be geographic differences, there might be language differences, political problems. So fixating on an addressable problem is actually much harder, I think, from an SDG perspective, but it's thinking about you can't solve all just the macro massive problem immediately, and in which case it's figuring out how can I have an addressable problem, identify an addressable problem where then my solution can be actually applied to actually fix a bigger problem. Next slide, please. So in terms of a solution, I think kind of more straightforward. I'll touch on secret sauce and advantage. Solution, as I mentioned just now, needs to be simple and easy to understand, but you also need to highlight where your advantage is. A lot of times people come up with ideas that they themselves are not the most well placed to execute, and that becomes a problem because I think anytime where anytime these situations come up, it's very easy for the audience, for the judge, for the panel to see, again, the idea might be good, but clearly the person or the team is not the most well placed to actually execute it. So it has to align, and then this is where sort of the needs and the team kind of comes into play further down the road. Where I want to spend a little more time actually is on the front to back to front. So usually people talk about, a front to back solution. And usually that covers most of it. But one thing I think people often overlook is actually going back, doing the 360 view more than once, because usually more often than not, say in these hackathons, you're staring at a problem for days or weeks, and you're very focused on solving that problem. But if you don't actually look and see, does solving your problem create other problems? That could create huge issues down the road. And just to give you a quick example, again, in sort of the in the logistics space in Hong Kong, for those actually in Hong Kong, if you know, there's a company called Hong Kong TV Mall, their platform. They aim to basically create efficiency and delivery for FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods in Hong Kong. And how they actually did that is they created a consolidation warehouse. They got a big delivery fleet, and now they've become the logistics hubs for quite a lot of fast-moving consumer goods in Hong Kong. Now, they did this again, great. They were able to deliver lots of stuff, but they actually created a new problem for themselves, which is returns. They actually had to rent a warehouse equivalent the size of probably about 25 to 30% of their total warehouse occupancy because they didn't actually think about the return aspect. And so basically any returns would just keep piling up back in their warehouse. And so again, it's about going front to back, but then also going back to the front and just thinking about what other problems could arise from the problem that you've solved. Now, and bring this into the framework of SDG and quality education. Imagine if you could create a streaming education service that can be suddenly brought to 395 million children. That's probably roughly the demographic of, say, children in India. Wouldn't that be great? That's a great solution. Awesome. But have you thought about potentially, let's say if it's a streaming service, you'll need internet. Is there sufficient bandwidth to actually host the sudden increase in activity while not affecting sort of other people and businesses in the community? Is there enough electricity in the population to accommodate and also not affect the rest of the community as well? So that's where when I think about these things, it's about front to back to front, and why this is actually so important is for any type of solution that you're going to come up with here within the hackathon, it's not going to be bulletproof. It's not going to not have its issues. But the quicker you can actually tell the audience, tell the investor, tell the judge that you've been able to identify these issues and problems, it makes it that much easier for the audience to believe that you are actually ahead of these problems, and you'll be actually ahead in being able to solve them and make it a sustainable solution. Next slide, please. So when we go on about sort of market, normally in terms of understanding whether an audience, investor, or anyone will actually buy into the idea, the first thing obviously is the idea. How new is it? How much does it solve the problem? Usually the second thing is understanding how big is your market. So if things actually really do go as planned, the audience can actually measure the return, the impact, etc. Now, obviously, the innovation part of it is covering solution. For market size, typically in any sort of normal commercial pitch, it's a quantitative measurement. You can clearly identify this is target market, and it's a number. And as you can see on the slide, growing market size is always positive if you're actually looking at everything from a return perspective. Now, from an SDG perspective, this is where it gets complicated, because it's not always just a quantitative measurement. It's a qualitative impact measurement, and qualitative impact measurement is also not always going in one direction. Growing, as you can see, growing impact size could be hugely negative. And I'll give you an example of that. Let's say back to my favorite streaming education example. If we equipped every child in a certain country with tablets so they can stream content from this streaming education service that we've established, we can actually measure the screen time that they've been using the tablet for compared to relative to other countries. Now, if we actually measured that there's, the 395 million children now have access to tablets, they're able to actually get content from your education streaming service, but they spend far more screen time on these tablets than any other country, and they spend far less time doing physical activities. The impact size or the market size is huge, but the actual impact is not very positive. It could be very, very negative. And then also in terms of qualitative impact is also understanding causality versus correlation, because it's always hard to measure whether it's actually causing your solution is causing a certain result, or is it actually correlated to a certain result. So these types of things from I guess an SDG framework, it's a little more complicated to figure out exactly whether your market size or your impact size is actually how to measure that impact size, because it's not going to always just be a number. So it's always thinking about how do I actually put it in context in terms of a number, because the number is not going to be always very just representing everything that I need to show. But then how is it that I can measure the positive impact that it's actually having? Next slide, please. So business model. Normally, obviously, for any pitch, everyone will sort of try to understand how's it that I'm going to make money, because a profitless business is likely not worth investing in. But from an SDG framework perspective, that could be very, very different, because a profitless, sustainable solution that is creating sustained positive impact is actually very likely worth investing in. So understanding what the end goal is will drive what the business model and solution looks like. It's not always about profits, but it's about how to actually create a sustainable solution, because it's not always from a commercial perspective. But at the same time, the business model or the sustainable model will actually drive the behavior for the solution that you're actually trying to create. So another example, if I told you for the streaming education service, we can sign up volunteers at a very, very high rate and have sufficient volunteers every day to teach, that can actually be a sustainable solution. But at the same time, from a business perspective, that might not be it might not be an actual worthwhile and sustainable business model from a commercial perspective. So something to think about. Actually, just wary of time. Next slide, please. From a pitch perspective, understanding obviously what your solution is, understanding sort of how you're going to make money or how you're going to actually be able to sustain this solution. But another critical aspect is, who are your competitors? Now, from any sort of normal pitch, is any investor, any audience will want to understand how your solution stacks up against competition. Now, I think from an SDG framework perspective, it's not always about being better or eliminating your competition. It's actually a lot of times probably about collaboration, because the problems that you're trying to solve is far, far bigger, and having yourself, your team alone, and not leveraging on the work that other people have done is going to be a big do a big disservice to, I guess, the community that you're trying to impact. And so from an SDG perspective, understanding what's been done, what's out there, what other people can do, and actually thinking about it in terms of collaborating, and hopefully, again, the chart, the sort of diagram shows it all. It's how do you reduce the amount of time to make the biggest impact? The greater the competition is great. It drives innovation, it drives new ideas, it drives lots of things. But at the same time, from an SDG perspective, it's not always about eliminating your competition. It's about how do you leverage on work that others also have done. Maybe you become the enabler of a product instead of actually creating the product yourself to actually create the greatest impact. So from an SDG perspective, thinking about collaboration, I think is more important. Our next slide. So I think again, sort of on the left side is basically what any sort of standard pitch you probably need to cover all those aspects. And then whereas on the right hand side is probably more of what I think from an SDG framework perspective, what you would actually need to do to think about because it's far more important. It's far more complex. Sorry, from an SDG perspective, the solution that you're going to be putting out there. Is not going to be just numbers driven. It's not going to be easily measurable just from a profit perspective. 30 seconds, yes, you need to be able to captivate your audience. But the problem is not going to be so straightforward where, it's I have this operational problem, I have this profit problem. You're going to have to be able to pinpoint the addressable problem to then actually solve a bigger potential problem. From a solutions perspective, you need to be able to actually see whether front to back to front, whether you've actually covered, because solving one problem could create many different problems as well. Market size, again, it's not about a number, pinpointing a number. It's about actually figuring out qualitative and quantitatively, how do I measure the people that I'm impacting, but at the same time, how do I measure that it's actually making a positive impact? From a business model perspective, how do I actually make this a sustainable model? And then competition, again, it's not always about eliminating competitors, finding your collaborators, marketing team, traction and needs, measuring what it is that you're doing, and basically the people that's actually needed to actually drive the initiatives. Sorry, just cognizant of time and wanted to leave some time for questions as well. That's sort of what I had. Any questions?
If anyone has any questions, you can either type in the Teams chat or unmute yourself and ask your question. We'll give people 30 seconds.
To just start off, the question is, here I see is like, do you have any tips on people who are trying to condense like information into like, because obviously there's a lot of information into a shorter pitch and more concise pitch?
Yeah. So normally, even back in sort of investment banking days, again, it's finding that key word, key phrase that would highlight the point, because making presentations, writing sort of a lot of words, it's hard for people to actually grasp, especially in these sort of competitions or any sort of shorter presentation. You need to find the key word or the key phrase that people can remember from your presentation. So imagine if you actually if you put together this whole pitch deck, you should start off all with the same, again, sort of getting a little technical, start off with all the same color font, and then go through each slide and highlight the word that actually you want people to remember in that slide. Because at the end of the day, you're going to go through 10 slides, 15 slides. People are going to remember from your presentation what sort of the big idea is and a few keywords that you probably highlight in your presentation. And those are the things that will stick with them when they actually evaluate and analyze your idea versus other people's ideas. So again, it's pinpointing the few keywords that you want people to remember in their head after, because again, all these investors, audience, judges, panels, they're going to be going through so many different presentations, so many different ideas. There are going to be so many interesting things. You need them to be able to quickly grasp when they think of your idea, what are the few 5 keywords that they actually think about.
All right, got you. I mean, We have one more question from the chat. What's the main difference between marketing and, I believe the second term is
Distribution. Yeah.
distribution? Yes.
Yeah. So in terms of marketing, normally when for any sort of normal standard any sort of standard business pitch, it's about acquiring customers. Cost of customer acquisition. I'm sure you guys probably have heard these things. Whereas from an SDG perspective, I don't think actually acquiring customers is the issue. It's more about how do you get your solution out to the population that you're trying to impact. And that so it's a very different mindset in terms of thinking about getting the solution to people. One is actually how do I post on Facebook, Instagram, going through all these different channels, and what's the cost of actually getting people to actually use your service, see my product, etc. Whereas I think from an SDG perspective, say quality education, it's not that the people don't want the quality education. It's not that the people don't want your solution. Is that they just are there might not be a means in which they can actually use your service, use your product. And so the issue is not so much how do you acquire the customers, but how do you actually get the end user access to the solution. And so that's where I think from an SDG framework perspective, it's slightly different. It's not necessarily needing to acquire and market your service. Is actually thinking about how to actually distribute and get the product out there.
All right. Thank you, Jason. I mean, thank you so much for giving such wonderful advice on how to do SDG pitching and effectively, essentially present and frame your solutions. That was very inspirational, and I think that a lot of students took a lot away from it. Students and any participants in this call right now, if you have any questions, just let the hackathon team know. Like, you can message us on WhatsApp or on email if there's anything in regards to the SDG pitch, and hopefully Jason will be able to answer a few questions if you have some. But otherwise, thank you so much, and Jason, we really appreciate it.
All right, thanks everyone, and good luck.
Yep. Evelyn, if you can stop recording. So the next